Hi, everybody. So great to be here.
Hi, good
Skylar,
afternoon.
there's Elizabeth. Thanks so much for the setup. Like she mentioned, for myself here at Kazoo, I've been able to sort of study this for the last few years. This collision that's now sort of hitting the headlines these days. And sitting next to me is Elizabeth, who has not only scaled our customer success team here. I think it's around 6 times bigger than when I joined. But she also gets to work directly with the thousands of organizations that we've helped over the years to sort of look into this. So really excited. Elizabeth's sort of a personal hero of mine, so this is kind of really excited here, and I hope you are too. But jumping right in, we'd love to go over again, sort of clarifying what is this collision. You might have seen the same sort of topic in some recent headlines. Maybe it caught your eye because you're associated with the customer success team at your company, or you affect some of the programs that influence the employee experience or influence your customers. So let's define that a little bit, but then going beyond some of the high-level stats and recent research, we kind of want to dive into some of the intangibles, some of the sort of common denominators that lead to success versus sort of the status quo. And again, I think Elizabeth's going to be able to provide some great color commentary on sort of diving into that. But from that, those things are a little bit intangible, but maybe we can sort of help define them, give you some ways to look out for them at your own companies, and then take some action away. And then time allowing, we'll maybe have some QA at the end. So let's get into it. And again, this topic of the collision, Elizabeth, I love hearing you sort of talk about this because you've observed it firsthand. But what's sort of your overview?
Yeah, thanks for first that wonderful introduction, Skylar. I think that the mutual admiration is certainly there, and excited to be here talking today about something I feel really passionately about. I've had a career that has really focused on customers first, and it's been an important change for me, I think, over the last 4 years that I've been with Kazoo, in order to really understand more of what that means and how you sort of move forward with the customer first mentality. As you see on your screen, and I think surprising to no one, that 89% of companies expect to compete primarily on their customer experience. We are very much focused on that in today's world, and with access to really any brand at any time with social media for complaints and praise, it's really surfaced to the top. So we know that it's an important priority. We know that it's a differentiator, but I think that there are some barriers there that we don't always understand why we can't achieve the level of success with our customers and the interactions we have with them like we'd want to.
Another interesting about this stat on the screen, just setting up this presentation, I saw that it was less than 5 years ago, this number was just over it was something like 34 or 35%. Wow. So just in the last 5 years, companies are saying it's this many companies are saying it's that high of a priority for them. So, it seems like they're really pointing towards this as sort of helping the business. But what's sort of really going on though?
Yeah, and I think that when we think about the company and we think about our customers, you have sort of a handful of opportunities to really get it right. Your interactions with your customers are relatively limited. I mean, as much as you would like to interact with them daily, in some cases you get to, but you have way more control and leverage over the experiences you have with your employees. So you think about that idea of, the customer comes first, but is that at the expense of your employee? When you sort of reorder that a little bit and you think about all the interactions that you have with your employees over time and the positive experience that they have, and we'll talk about really what that looks like in action, but if they're an engaged employee, then their ability to interact with the customer then becomes sort of this pay it forward mentality where as a customer-facing individual, I feel like I'm able to give the best service. And then as a company, I can see a direct correlation between employee happiness and customer satisfaction.
Yeah, this was another part. It was really interesting to me. And hearing you describe it, it makes so much sense. But I don't know if it comes as a shock to anyone sort of listening, or if we talk to sort of large organizations or more traditional organizations, it just still seems to make so much sense that if something comes up, like a fire, maybe we call it internally, that we need to put out, to just do whatever it takes, right, to sort of address that customer need. And the problem is when we're being reactionary that way, when we're putting out fires that way sort of every day, we seem to be railroading the employee experience and, what's sort of happening with those people who have to deal with that on the way to it. So in the short term, yes, we're satisfying the customers, we're putting the customer first, but in the long run, it seems to be causing, direct damage to the employee experience.
Yeah, and I think as you really start to think about reverse engineering that a little bit, that winning in a single conversation for a customer, but what's the long-term damage of that employee that's potentially feeling demoralized because, there's a myriad of reasons of it had to be mutually exclusive, that in order for the customer to be right, they had to be wrong. And what does that mean sort of long-term for your employees as well and their continued interactions?
I think someone's got our back on this too. One of our good friends.
Yeah, one of our favorite people. Genuinely, we're big fans of Sir Richard Branson, but we love this quote for so many reasons. But clients do not come first, employees come first. If you take care of your employees, they will take care of the clients. Obviously, it feels logical, right? I mean, it feels like, well, of course, if I'm an employee and I'm customer facing, if I feel supported and fulfilled and excited, then the interactions I have with customers will go above and beyond and, be an even better interaction. And so ultimately, in today's workforce, a bad employee experience will catch up to how your customers are being treated. And that's exactly what we mean by the collision of the customer experience and the employee experience.
Yep, definitely not that we're trying to say the customer's always right is wrong and you should feel wrong. It's just hopefully for the first time there's sort of a more mainstream realization of how intertwined these two things are. They're not, they're sort of not separate. They're working together sort of every day. So sort of changing our mindset a little bit as the frame, as the setup for today's topic, to be thinking about the employee experience and its collision with the customer experience. So if that's starting to make sense for everybody, as it has for us, and again, as you might have seen it in recent headlines, well, the problem is if we start focusing on the employee experience, or if maybe you're already sort of in this mindset, as Gallup has pointed out, a pretty famous stat now in recent years, over 2/3 of us, at least in the US, are just actively not engaged at work. So if an engaged employee is what's directly leading to these great customer experiences, like the correlation is there, well, the problem is that sort of middle step is missing right now. We're just actively sort of not engaged. And if you think about what comes with that sort of active disengagement, right, not only is the customer experience can be affected, but things like turnover. Gallup also showed that overall this sort of active disengagement is costing companies about $450 to $500 billion a year in sort of all the costs associated with engagement. But just zeroing in on the customer experience, I think it was Gartner that found, when they looked at the sort of top quadrant, like the best 25% of companies that were sort of thinking this way about, sort of really taking up this collision and running with it, they had across the board about 10% stronger customer metrics sort of all around. So, they're really starting to see some of the benefits of that. And speaking of those, another stat here, this is from the Association for Talent Development. Again, companies that are sort of realizing this and seem to be investing in employee development, investing in the employee experience. Per employee, they're seeing 200% higher income, which is pretty incredible. But again, this also isn't just some sort of fuzzy concept, right? Like it's really starting to be quantified. And as you can see on the screen, when companies are unlocking this, when they are getting to that sort of more engaged employees, increasing that number, those companies are outperforming their competitors by 147%.
Which is an astounding number. I mean, 147% of overachievement. And, I love that idea of really looking at the correlation of what engaged employees mean for your bottom line. I think a lot of objections that we hear to this thinking is, well, what's the true ROI? What's the thing that's going to help my executives buy into this idea? Because there is the dogma that the customer comes first. Being able to come with stats and story, not just as it feels good to treat our employees better, to be able to say, hey, there's a pretty distinct correlation about output and what that's going to mean for our bottom line by really engaging our employees, especially for the purpose of this conversation, as it relates to how they interact with our customers.
Totally. The bottom line is there, the ability to sort of quantify is there, the recent research is there. But I mean, really just from a human perspective, right? Like we've all, I hope, had that great experience with a customer success team before. These are those employees you interact with that are, staying a few minutes after hours to sort of help you, navigate a certain situation on the phone or really sticking with you until something's resolved. These are those employees that maybe you see at your company that are kind of volunteering for things outside their day-to-day jobs. They're being patient, empathetic with your customers. They really want to seek and sort of solve problems, not just this individual fire, but like what can we do to sort of make this situation better moving forward. They're sort of just genuine, helpful people, not sort of pushy salespeople, not people who are just there for the direct bullet points of their jobs, right? We've all sort of run into those people in great customer experiences. And sure, some of them maybe are unicorns, but others, it's the symptom of actually being engaged in my job, right? Like being aligned to not only my individual goals, but the goals of the company, and you can feel that. So we can either hope to get lucky and have a customer success team like that, or we can sort of look at what's happening sort of behind the scenes. What are the kind of intangibles? What are the common things happening on those teams that cause that level of customer support, that level of customer success? And that's what we'd like to sort of tackle a little bit in depth today. But first, throw this quick poll out there. And really, you've heard us sort of take apart that dogma about the customer always comes first, and just sort of a gut check for people listening right now. Like if you look at your own programs, your own processes, your own metrics, your own KPIs, do you think you're prioritizing customers over your employees? And it's okay to be honest here because it's semi-anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. Obviously, it's okay if you are. It's just sort of the expectation here is, you're clinging to the output of, hey, we really want customers to have the best experience possible. But there's such an opportunity to build that and make that even stronger and more predictable with your employees directly.
Yeah, so around a 60-40 split, that's great. Some of this is maybe things that you're already sort of approaching and you'll have more concrete actions for it. For others, again, we're not saying that, thinking that the customer comes first is bad at all. It's just when you look past that a little bit, maybe you'll see some of the common mistakes we're talking about, or maybe there are some of the early symptoms of kind of disengaged employees happening, and this could be a part of that. So let's dive into those, like as we said, sort of intangibles. I mean, there's a ton of research here, and we also just have kind of years of direct exposure to this stuff. But when we started discussing it and picking apart our own research and sort of recent research in the headlines, we boiled it down to these kind of three concepts for the purpose of the conversation today. There's this notion of having trusting connections with colleagues, of having performance management that employees don't dread, and manager relationships that establish support on their teams. These we think of as sort of intangibles, again, like I said, things that are a little bit harder to measure, a little bit harder to check for. But if you know sort of what to look for, if you know kind of some common checks or common mistakes that happen against these, you'll hopefully have a path to, affecting change towards them and then seeing some harder metrics sort of get affected by them.
And I think there's also a lot to be said here, back to your earlier point of just hoping that you luck into these kinds of employees that are willing to go the extra mile and, are really customer obsessed. Or, the good news is you can build it. And we're going to talk about some of these are intangibles, but there's things that you can do to help facilitate that in order to, even if it's just, incremental improvement, to foster a better relationship with your employees that relate to your customers.
And I might say this a couple times, but if any of this seems, a little high level, or if it does seem like something you'd love to dig into action items are beyond the ones that we'll kind of quickly cover today, keep an eye on your inbox afterwards. We're going to send out some resources that just full of sort of links and courses and all sorts of extra things tied to all of these concepts. So feel free to browse that as well afterwards, because we're pretty passionate about this stuff. We'd love for anyone to learn more if they want. All right, so let's get into that first intangible we touched on, this notion of sort of fostering trusting connections on the team. When I was writing out some of this content, I summarized it as, thinking to myself, if I were to look at our own team, is our team thankful or thankless, as a way to kind of summarize how you talk about it. I do love how you talk about it. I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts again on this.
I've got so many thoughts. Obviously no surprise here, but I'm pretty passionate about the customer. I'm passionate about what it means to be customer facing and what those boundaries look like, how boundaries also empower you, and being proactive, the way you think about your customers, because being customer facing is a hard job. I mean, I'm hoping that people are nodding their heads, even if you're not customer facing, that you understand that, that the people that you sort of have in the trenches, who are facilitating conversations, and whether that's a volume of 100 conversations a day or 5 conversations a day, I think it takes a lot out of you, because it is so human, and you're trying to create relationships and partnerships and be supportive and be empathetic, especially when giving great service. And so for me, this idea of building a team, and again, this doesn't just have to be your customer team, although that is incredibly helpful, but creating a culture at work where people have a safe place to retreat and recharge and then rally, so that they can go back out and continue to have positive conversations, because your ability to sort of come internally and be recharged then goes out and helps you give more, because it feels like it can be depleting when you're having a lot of conversations over and over again. And again, whether those are positive or negative, you don't want to rely on the person just being able to find that on their own, that giving them a safe space to come back, not only be vulnerable, but also, you have other people who are very well versed in many customer interactions and exchanges as well, that there's an opportunity to learn and share, and, being cautious that it doesn't become a situation where people can complain, but is more of a, hey, I ran into this, and someone else can, one, identify with that and say, yeah, I've been there. I tried this, it worked pretty well. Or I tried this, it didn't work, but next time I'm thinking about this. That camaraderie is so tangible and so important, because I feel like I am progressing as an employee. I feel like I'm able to have better conversations with customers, but also rely on my team to sympathize if I need that, help me grow when I need that, because that's not an if, that's a when. And then also to really help create some sort of exposure, I guess, across the business of, this is what's happening, this is what our customers are saying, and that's being circulated through the business as well.
I love it. You can't see it, but I can. Elizabeth sort of leaning in when she talks about this stuff. She's so passionate about it. I'm not on her team, unfortunately, but I'm trying to sort of empathize with that. We all can think of that really difficult customer conversation, a really difficult bit of feedback that we get directly from a customer in a customer situation. I'm that customer service representative, and I get off that call, and it's sort of washing over me, right? This kind of really, wow, did I mess up? What's going to happen here? Are there going to be repercussions? And that difference of, do I have to just internalize this myself and sort of try to pick myself up for the rest of the day? Or am I surrounded by people, or am I in a team situation where, I can sort of talk about that, learn about that, not feel scared when that happens? And hopefully you can sort of feel that difference. That's the intangible we're talking about here. If I have those kinds of trusting connections. So we say on the slide, a check is the camaraderie that Elizabeth's talking about, not competition. I mean, CS teams have to have metrics, things like number of tickets that we closed this month or time to resolution on an issue. But if I'm only focusing on those and not looking around and trying to boost sort of my peers, that's maybe a situation where competition is winning out over camaraderie, just to sort of simplify it.
I am a big fan of team goals. I love having a goal that everybody contributes to as well. And so having somebody sitting next to you who's having conversations that if we're all aiming toward a certain part of the business, let's say it's, cross-sell opportunities within current customers, that I am enabling the person sitting next to me to have the best possible conversation that they can have because we all win as a team. They might learn something, I might learn something, all in the effort to get better, but to achieve something and that sort of quiet confidence that comes with achieving team goals, I think really makes this something that is a gift that keeps on giving. That casts a very long shadow.
And so we're writing this out, and I hear you talking about it, but I'm saying to myself, well, sounds great. How do we get there? And our advice, again, you see here, if we were to boil it down to something really simple, is do a quick audit of how you're currently handling rewards and recognition. We're biased because we make a technology that allows us to sort of handle this problem inherently. But technology is one of the things that can really sort of help create these trusting connections. For us, in the Kazoo platform, we have an aspect of that allows, this notion of social recognition. Compare some ways that recognition is handled at companies. You think of that being sort of locked down one-to-one in a Slack message or via email or a quick, hey, good job at the end of a meeting, or maybe there's like an anonymous sort of form or spreadsheet that companies have where someone can submit hey, this person did a great job, and it's kind of locked down. It's not widely seen across the team, across the whole company. We have just sort of a natural social activity feed that when someone's being recognized, it's showing up there. And when we see one of these difficult situations being handled, or there's sort of a small win with the customer, it immediately goes in there, and the rest of the company gains visibility on it, or the rest of the CS team sort of rallies around that and interacts with it. We just have a sort of natural, organic way, because of this technology, to, again, prop people up, celebrate small wins every day. And over time, when that's just sort of becomes part of the culture, becomes part of the company, it really goes a long way in creating a shortcut to these kind of trusting connections that we're talking about.
Agreed completely. And the celebration, especially going from is your team thankful or thankless, it sort of removes some of that idea of it's on the manager to give recognition and sort of gives it out. The responsibility becomes a team responsibility, and again feeds into that cycle of, we are all helping each other, we're all building camaraderie, vulnerability, which makes it then go forward. I do think that the common mistake here is a question I get a lot, is I have a top performer who's toxic, that they can't seem to get along with the team, that they go out of their way to not be helpful to the team, but they're doing, as an individual contributor, doing really well via the metrics. My advice here is people are watching. People are watching what you're doing. If your employees care about who you hire, who you fire, and who you promote. Sometimes you'll be surprised by removing a toxic performer at how high the potential becomes for everybody else on your team. They start performing at a higher level, which I'm sure is not surprising to anyone on this call. But I do think that there's absolutely coaching conversations to have with them, and the idea that, hey, this is where we are. We need to get on board or figure out a transition out of the business, because that person will hold you back if they don't get on board. And I really feel like when you remove a couple people from the situation, and I've seen it go both ways, where they're either removed or they're just coached up, it becomes a game changer. And then when you start including your employees in the hiring process so that they feel like they also have a voice in, interviews or giving feedback on candidates, that you start to see even more of that buy-in that propels you forward.
Yeah, this is a really tough question. And I know if you're listening and you're stuck in this situation, another piece of advice is it's hard to make that business case for removing these employees sometimes when they are a top individual contributor. And Elizabeth alluded to a little earlier, looking at the team goals. If there seems to be something off or stagnant or sort of plateauing or even cratering when it comes to the team goals, a lot of times something like this could be the center of that. So eliminating that, you have sort of a better sort of business case when looking at the team goal aspect of it, but you'll also see it really free you up to sort of gain this intangible at your company. Speaking of intangibles, let's hit the next one. It's this notion of performance management and doing it in a way that people don't dread. Again, I just keep reacting to Elizabeth's face here in the room, but when I talk about performance management, I can see her do that kind of slow shake of the head. It's one of those words, one of those concepts that's tough for all of us. And my summary here is, are we getting enough don't take it personally training when it comes to performance management? And I would love to hear your kind of summary on that.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about traditional performance management and having just annual conversations, once a year conversations, we tend to focus on the big mistakes when we're looking back. And a lot of those become really demotivating. I think one of the interesting things here we talk about is don't take it personally training. If I'm customer facing and I'm having lots of conversations, the access to real-time feedback is very important to me. And it should be very important to the business because reinforcing and correcting real-time, not waiting, worst case, an entire year to tell me what I'm doing well or what I can improve on, when every opportunity I have to speak to a customer doesn't reflect how I could be getting better and growing. And again, not that interaction has to be from my manager, that feedback can be from a peer, but it becomes less overwhelming because as a CS person, customer facing, you need to be able to both give and receive feedback without internalizing it. And so getting training on that, getting used to it, it's like anything. The more you use it, the better practice you'll be. And if I regularly hear what I'm doing right or what I can improve, then it removes that sense of dread from these discussions that happen less frequently. If I know that the world doesn't end when I get feedback, then it just makes it easier to take it in stride.
Wow. Yeah, avoiding, again, just hearing you say that, hey, can we have a talk like that? I got sort of squeamish, like just hearing that line, right? It's a tough thing to hear almost anywhere, especially at work. And in looking at this, like seriously, it's sort of in vogue. It's pretty common to kind of bash on the end of year performance reviews at this point. But in setting up this presentation, talking to you about it, I realized that the backwards looking end of year review, I really feel like customer success, customer support teams are sort of more susceptible to this sense of dread than others because again, so much is happening daily. So many customer interactions are happening daily. How many of the sort of small wins or sort of putting out small fires or like doing preventative measures it is going on daily? But when we look back months later at stuff, what's probably more easier to stand out is where we messed up, right? And talk about already being in a thankless job. If that's the sort of end of year review situation that they're sort of fighting the uphill battle against, like this really is something that can take a big hit to the employee experience for customer success teams. So our advice, that like you were talking about, is try to switch to a continuous performance management model as opposed to something that looks back or maybe doesn't give you as many opportunities for feedback. And this is another instance where we're spoiled, where the companies we work with are spoiled because, again, inherently on our platform, we have tools built in that allow us to have more of this continuous performance management model. The technology sort of naturally prods our teams and our managers and our direct reports to, set up regular feedback sessions. It brings along the notes from the last time we had check-ins with each other along. It prompts us to not only set individual goals, but shows us how those could and should align to our department's goals and our company's goals, so that when we are having sort of feedback discussions, it's not like a sort of a blank slate, like the manager isn't trying to think on the spot of what should be said in a easy or difficult conversation. Right. The technology is like naturally sort of providing those talking points or giving us discussion topics because of past feedback sessions, because of goals that we've set, check-in notes that we have on hand, stuff like that. So again, not only prompting us to have more of these sort of feedback opportunities, but prompting us to have the right kinds of conversations when those happen.
Well, and how easy is it to forget? I mean, how easy is it to not be able to pinpoint the successes of, last month, let alone try to sum it up into an entire year, especially as a manager. I feel like I'm doing a disservice to my employees because they have had successes throughout the year. And if I get one opportunity to talk to them, I probably have a pretty short memory of what each of them individually has accomplished, as well as, when you have a larger full reporting chain, having a record of that is helpful. As I get older and I'm not taking my ginkgo biloba, I'm like, what happened? Let's, make sure that we're celebrating being excited, but also really helping real-time influence over actions, and because that immediately goes in play with your customers.
Yeah, I can't even remember what month we're in right now. Is it still June? I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
So I definitely know what you're talking about. So of course, as you've heard us say, the sort of common mistake when it comes to intangibles, still being in a model with those kind of dreaded and delayed performance reviews. All this, something to keep in mind. If an intangible of these teams, again, is performance management conversations that people don't dread. The third of the three is this notion of manager relationships. This really kind of goes hand in hand with performance management, like we were just talking about.
I feel like this is such a key part of what you're doing, because people leave managers, not jobs. That's the traditional saying. Check. It just feels like the relationship that I have with my manager, and potentially being a manager as well, what kind of feedback, what kind of support are you giving to your employees, and also modeling for them to be better managers themselves? I think there's such an opportunity here to sort of show that your manager sees you and values you. When we talk about continuous performance management, there's an approach that we're constantly feeding into overall visibility, like Skylar was talking about, putting it on a feed, putting it someplace public, whether you're doing it at all hands. I mean, this idea that my manager knows and appreciates what I do and also supports sort of the message that I'm giving out, and that we're in unison, makes me feel like I'm contributing to the company in a better, stronger way. So when I'm having my one-on-ones, like the slide says check for effective one-on-ones, the idea of, are they even occurring? Like, start here, because a lot of times it's just not happening. How do you institute a way for there to, step one, be one-on-ones, step two, make sure that they're effective, and being able to utilize those conversations in order to influence actions, again, with that continuous performance management, so that you feel like you're getting regular feedback, but also regular support.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, we could talk about managers and, their potential effectiveness and their influence on employees really all day. In fact, we have an e-course just on manager relationships, because there's so many sort of individual aspects that go into this. And I think it was Gallup has one of my most recent favorite stats. The managers seem to be the sort of the forgotten layer of these engagement programs. When we roll something out in the hopes that our overall engagement scores at companies will go up, there's often, again, a forgotten layer of getting managers on board with it, or teaching those managers how to get the most out of this program, or what our top level goals are for it. There's sort of a forgotten layer in the rollout process. They're just lumped in with the company sort of getting this new program and hoping everyone uses it. And I think that's a really big reason why that number we saw at the beginning, the 2/3 of employees still being disengaged, that number's barely budged, even though we seem to be investing more and more in this kind of stuff. And recently Gallup found that managers, just managers, can swing your engagement scores at your company by up to 70% per employee. They have that much variance in where an employee is going to sort of land. So when we talk about this stuff, again, there's so much that we could dive into. But when we talk to organizations, in smaller rooms and smaller discussions, one of the first things we ask you to check for are your one-on-ones effective? Again, like Elizabeth said, not just are they happening, but is that time being used effectively, or do both sides sort of think of it as an obligatory sort of weekly spot or monthly spot on my calendar? Because if they're being used effectively, that one-on-one interaction, that designated time, is really a great shortcut to all these things we keep talking about, where trust can be built between the direct report and the manager, where managers can start following up and following through, where we can sort of stay on the same page about what our objectives are and if we're headed there or not. And just that notion for the employee of our manager having our back, a lot of times it starts with a lot of the discussions happening there, and it sort of blossoms out to other things happening at the company. So I guess let's get into the common mistake associated with that also.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lack of ongoing manager training, that just because we make somebody a manager in title doesn't necessarily mean that they're prepared or they have the tools. They might have the desire. And so ongoing manager training is really a must. Like, you have to be able to enable your managers to grow, and part of that is, creating that trust that is key. But then another part of that is modeling behavior and showing them that it's in line with the core values of your company, showing them what actions they can take as a manager really influences all of their employees, so that there's a responsibility that's associated with being a manager, more so than just getting projects done on time or producing good work, is developing staff to be better and push through, to have more opportunities in professional progression. There are also great managers that you have right now, like any kind of mentorship from an established manager to a new manager, and building those bridges, I think, is another great way to informally keep that training going.
Yeah, we've seen this firsthand. Like I said, the company's grown. It's about 6 times bigger today than when I started. And we implemented these trainings a couple of years ago to, again, not only pull wisdom from experienced managers, but also if the company is getting certain kinds of feedback regularly, these sort of focused manager sessions and trainings were ways to sort of bring that up among the group, aim ourselves towards a solution, and then have that sort of, get practiced across all the teams. And I think it's been incredibly effective. Just speaking for me as a human, I've had some of my best managers at this company in my whole career, and I'm also, not to sound like that guy I'm sitting next to, I think one of the best managers I've ever met.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not only worked for us, but at companies where employee experience and you're implementing these programs, you're investing in them, sort of ongoing manager trainings that help keep us aligned. And hey, why are we doing this? What goals do we have for it? Having that be sort of ongoing. If that's not happening, it's a real common mistake that's kind of holding back these engagement initiatives and ultimately leading to those disengaged employees, which, as we now know, directly affect the customer experience. And really, not to harp on this too much, one thing is, like I mentioned before, our advice is to kind of use tech to help streamline this. Like, as you can tell from how passionate we are about the asks of managers, to go into every one-on-one or to go into every interaction with your direct reports and have that full picture of what are this person's individual goals, how are they doing sort of as a person, what have we talked about before. To carry that around, to juggle it, and to be able to act and add to it every single time is an incredible mental load, right? It's almost too much to ask. So to what extent is the tech that you have on hand able to, again, prompt some of these conversations or help carry notes forward, or kind of give you the simple to-do list of, hey, what do we need to follow up on and follow through on for next time, to reduce some of that mental burden on both sides. Again, we're spoiled because our platform sort of helps us do this, but there's a number of ways that this sort of tech can help you do that. If you are sort of auditing your teams and you don't see that there, find something either manually or sort of the formal platform for it. And just to touch a little bit more on the importance of these, we finished a study fairly recently. It was about 3,000 plus employees, really just digging into this notion of what effective or how effective one-on-ones can be for people. And I've got a ton of stats on the screen that you can see as a result of that. I won't go into all of these, and we are going to distribute these slides after the webinar, but you can just see at the top, like this 82% number. When they're having those frequent one-on-ones, it correlated 82% of the time with people who reported having a positive employee experience. I also like that one at the top and at the bottom. 38% more employees who have these said that they're also receiving feedback and appreciation for their work. I think it's a common stat to hear that employees are routinely reporting they don't feel appreciated enough. Ones who are having these one-on-ones more are, it sort of dampens that effect. And likewise at the bottom here, 44% who are having these more frequently, in their perception, the company has swift and transparent communication. Another bit of feedback that I'm sure all of us have heard, right? Like that you can never have enough transparency, or the bit of bad feedback that comes back in our employee surveys that they feel like the company isn't communicating things well enough. Well, again, if you're having these more frequent one-on-ones was one of the biggest sort of factors for sort of tamping that down. And everything on the screen here deals with having a better or worse employee experience. So one-on-ones, so good.
So important. Always a joy.
So those are the three sort of intangible effects. And then quickly, like sort of keeping those in mind, we'd love to jump into a couple examples. One is a company we don't work with is Jetblue, but I've sort of admired them from the sidelines. Not only enjoy flying with them, but just how they seem to be, when we sort of dug under the surface, they really seem to be applying these themselves. I found some interviews from their team, and sort of a mantra within them was this notion of investing in the team. Like they really, not only from a technology standpoint, but from a sort of human interactive standpoint, they had this notion of investing in them, and that affected the kinds of programs they were rolling out, the kinds of training that they were doing. And they were really big on this freedom to go the extra mile. And part of that's sort of an empowerment play. Given that sort of trusting relationship that they've built behind the scenes, the employees have this freedom to deal with every customer situation that comes their way. They feel free to, okay, I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to solve this. I'm going to leave this situation better, rather than I have to stop right now and turn around and deal with sort of the bureaucracy and the, hey, tap my manager on the back sort of situations.
Well, it's empowering. And I think that comes along with what we're talking about with training and sharing of ideas. And, that trust obviously is very scary from a company perspective to, and I put this in quotes, but let your employees navigate that experience for your customers. But you think about what that means as far as validation as an employee of I'm being trusted to be able to solve this problem without having to read from a playbook. I mean, of course, suggested is always a plus, but just coming in cold is never a great customer experience. To be able to connect and have the human side of it and someone be able to help is pretty poignant.
The third one here is they have in-person hospitality training. Like there's sort of ongoing trainings for up and down the whole organization, so that we're really up to speed on sort of how to handle some of these situations, or kind of what's the sort of JetBlue way or expected behavior towards it. Like really just Google JetBlue and customer experience. You'll find these sort of same articles. You'll find a lot more on sort of how they approach this internally. But I couldn't help but notice how much of it aligned to the intangibles that we were talking about. Those things like how to build and what you get when you build those trusting relationships, those manager relationships. And the results speak for themselves. They're ranked highest in customer satisfaction for 12 years in a row. Direct example of this collision of employee experience. Another one that maybe some people here haven't heard of, but we've been working with them the last few years, is Randolph Brooks Federal Credit Union, RBFCU. One of the biggest, if not the biggest.
Number 2 in Texas, but they're pretty much sort of the gold standard for customer experience, which they call their customers members. But we've been lucky enough to work with them for, like Skylar said, the last couple of years, and they really take the employee experience and the customer experience to a new level. They're utilizing things like, within our platform, this simple social peer-to-peer recognition. They're showing these really incredible wins that they're getting from a customer perspective, but also from a team perspective, like we talked about, that camaraderie and really facilitating that, building that up. We have Evan, who's a VP over there, recognizing her team for what they've done, and people's ability to comment on that or agree with that. It really just highlights the visibility of, hey, this is a hardworking team that's doing all of these things right, and it feels like they're seeing direct results because of it.
Yeah, I've walked the halls at their HQ, and we've got these examples on the screen. These are not only just peer-to-peer employees, but VPs sort of recognizing teams. You can sort of feel it when you talk to them, that each of them is sort of in the know about what each other's working on, but also it seems like very at a moment's notice to, do whatever it takes to let's all do this kind of, that sort of togetherness, that camaraderie. It looks subtle when we throw an example up here, but their feed is just full of this, kind of recognition, like constantly building up that culture of this. It's great.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I love, we have an example here. We talked a lot about managers, but they've gotten their CEO involved in it as well. They have a custom reward where the CEO will come over and high-five you. You can redeem for it within the platform, which is obviously great for the company because it's a no-cost reward. But it's really, they've taken it a step further, and their CEO will write a note as well as come over and give you a high-five. The idea that you have a leadership team that's invested in this sort of same culture speaks volumes. And Christina, who this note is addressed to, she actually has this up in her cubicle. She's pretty proud of it. It's such a lightweight thing that drives so much value. And I think one of the sort of magical parts of what RBFCU has done is that, they recognized that they needed to serve their customers. They saw the way that their employees were getting treated and interacting with each other, and they saw that there was an opportunity there, and they capitalized on that.
I love this, yeah. I mean, you think about, maybe some of us work at organizations with thousands of employees, but at an organization that big, it's sort of like CEOs walking through, you kind of sit up a little straighter, it's like, oh, CEOs coming by like better. But they, have gotten their CEO totally embrace this program, and the employees see that. And then, again, this being sort of one of the most in-demand sort of rewards on the platform, not just kind of a joke or something that's just for show there, and then the CEO really embracing it and writing these notes. Again, feels intangible, but they can now, sort of measure that.
Last example here for RBFCU, as far as something that we just pulled directly from their feed, but the idea that you can have that they have an administrator who is essentially the company that's able to give KPI recognition. So again, this idea of great service, and if you're receiving a certain number on a survey, that is uploaded into the system, and you're able to be recognized by your peers, not just by the person you had the great experience with, but there's such a good collision here of like recognizing the KPI of tied to a customer survey, but then socializing that internally as well, so that it just builds more onto that idea of being recognized for the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, it seems subtle, right? But let's think, just to think it through clearly, if you haven't used a platform like this before, a lot of times these kinds of bonuses, which are tied to either how I perform individually or service scores that I'm getting from our members, that's just something that would kind of be direct deposited, right? Or I might get a note at my desk or something, right? But by integrating it with where they have and where they host this program related to the employee experience, these metrics or these rewards related to the customer experience are going right to that same activity feed. So the place where we're all kind of celebrating each other's small victories or like propping each other up with recognition, these rewards for great customer experience are going right in that same feed. Awareness for it increases, and because they sort of embrace this and like really brought their customer experience programs directly with their employee experience programs, the results, which we just sort of looked at them this year, are amazing, I think.
Yeah.
For a company that member scores and member experience is sort of their lifeblood, a credit union, a large credit union, for instance, to see this middle stat here, especially 68% of the employees, a 68% increase in the number of employees that were hitting the highest customer service scores. I think when we looked at it, it ended up being half of the number of employees that were eligible for this bonus were getting that highest score from their members. So and that's just year over year. And then, again, this is intersected with the employee experience. So they also saw a decrease in turnover of 17%. And then when they looked at every month this year compared to this month last year, every single month, the net promoter score, which again is sort of the lifeblood of the company, was going up. So again, we applaud them, but they also are sort of one of the poster companies for this sort of interaction and the bottom line results you can see because of it.
And I think, we talked about JetBlue, we talked about RBFCU. The reality is that this can apply to any industry. So regardless of if you're in healthcare, hospitality, technology, it doesn't matter. We see these sort of ring true across industry. It's really agnostic as to the results you can see regardless of which industry that you're in.
Absolutely. We talked about a lot there, so I put it through a recap slide in here. I mean, really the collision is real. Hopefully we've helped you sort of reframe the thinking around, should I pause when I see situations where we're saying the customer is always right? Well, is there a little bit more to that statement, right? And thinking about this collision. Giving you a few ways to sort of boil these intangibles down to a few sort of quippy units, but also, again, you'll have the slides and stats here if you want to check in on those again. And also that hopefully we've allowed you to build a little bit of a business case in your head as well. This isn't just something sort of warm and fuzzy or like we said, intangible, even though we talked about intangible. When companies are embracing this collision, they're seeing real bottom line results, which is, I think, super exciting. All that said, thank you so much. I know we almost ran the top of the hour, but we'd love to see if there's any questions or again, stay tuned because we'll sort of hit your inbox with some follow-up materials and happy to answer anything via that medium as well.
We do have time for just one or two questions from our audience. We do have a listener who asks, how do you start this conversation? Because for some folks who are kind of locked in a more traditional mindset about the customer always coming first, it's really hard to start that conversation. So how can do you have any pointers for this person? How can you get them started on that road to having a conversation with their senior leadership that gets them to see that employee engagement does matter for customer engagement?
Yeah, I think, we actually I had a conversation with a customer about this exact point, and they were saying that they sort of came at it from the angle of, they were trying to prove out and come with, because they had a very data-driven CEO, they were coming with survey results, and those survey results were tied to what customers were saying and the interactions that the customers had with the company, and leading with that and leading with there's areas for improvement in those scores and what are the things that directly affect that. And so they took the angle of more employee training, and that was sort of the foot in the door of turning the spotlight from the customer to the employees. And so that's a pretty rational baby step to take of like, hey, if we focus on better training for our employees, then our customers will have better experiences. And then you're able to take that a little bit further so that it starts with training, which everybody feels, is a positive thing, as opposed to saying sometimes buzzwords like employee engagement. We want to focus on our employees. I also think it's worth noting that you never want to say you want to focus on employees instead of customers. It's an that link means that both, and we saw this with RBFCU, that both go up proportionately. So as employees are happier, customers are happier, that you're not really having to prioritize one over the other, but starting really just simply with what you can do to turn the attention to giving your employees more opportunities to be better at their job, and then slowly introducing more with that training then it becomes some of those intangibles that we talked about and additional focus on the engaged employee.
Absolutely. Yep. Helping sort of build that business case in there and using real data points to inform it. Much better way of starting that conversation than just kicking down the door and shouting, the customer isn't always right. Those conversations don't go well.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. Those are really great insights for our listeners today. But we are at the end of our time. So before we go, I just want to offer a reminder to our members that today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. Don't forget to check out hci.org for free content as well as information on our certifications and events. That wraps up all the time we have. We'll close today with one more thank you to Kazoo and to our presenters, Skylar and Elizabeth. If you missed any details, you can listen to this presentation again at any time. All of HCI's webcasts are available on demand on our website. For all of us here at HCI, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.